Big decision out of the Pentagon last week. Patrick Air Force Base in Brevard County back in the running to be home for the U.S. Space Command. You know it as Space Force. So this could be a huge deal, creating financial opportunities for so many on the Space Coast. I talked one-on-one with Congressman Michael Waltz earlier this week about the importance and the implications this could have for the Central Florida area. All right, 6 finalists announced by the Pentagon for the location of the U.S. Space Command, among them Patrick Air Force Base in beautiful Brevard County. Listen, we thought Florida was already out of the mix, so what happened?
Yeah, well, this is exciting and a great announcement coming from the Pentagon for Florida. A year ago, when the Space Force was first announced, Florida was kind of immediately cut out of the competition. I mean, our horse wasn't even in the race, and myself and our senators, our governor, our local officials all, stepped up and started asking a lot of tough questions and said, "Are you kidding me? Space is in Florida's DNA. We absolutely should be considered." And now, a year later, the Pentagon's reversed its decision, held a national competition, and Florida and Patrick Air Force Base is one of the finalists, and rightly so.
Something that you mentioned in our podcast that really jumped out at me to make people understand watching the show right now, dollars and cents. You said something for every $1 that's invested into the space program, what happens?
Yeah, over the years, a number of studies have showed that for every taxpayer dollar invested into the space program, anywhere from $8 to $12 comes back in return to our GDP. And most of that is from the technological spinoffs, everything from modern computer chips to how we do CAT scans and a lot of our medical breakthroughs, and on down the list. Of course, GPS, how we communicate from a modern standpoint today, even agriculture and really making that the most efficient, how we predict the weather and protect the country. All of that is from our space investments over the years and has been returned to our economy in droves. And so for those who sometimes question these investments, they more than pay off tenfold by a lot of estimates.
Fascinating when you break it down like that. And everybody watching right now saying, what podcast? Yes, we have a podcast. Central Florida Beyond the Soundbite. Download it now if you're watching. Okay, let's get back to this interview here on TV. You're on the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology, as well as as I looked down at my notes here, the Subcommittee on Space and Aeronautics, along with Bill Posey, of course, basically down the road from you, as well as Charlie Crist on the Tampa side, on the other side of I-4. Has the space industry been the #1 thing that you and these names that I just talked about face, when you go to Washington, basically the Florida delegation, when you're talking to anyone who has control of purse strings, when it comes to Florida, is that in the top 2-3 things that you mentioned?
Well, there's all kinds of things that we work on and prioritize, but this is certainly one of them. And Florida has a strong showing. And what I call that space triangle, really from west, even all the way west of the Orlando area, over to Daytona, down to the Space Coast, where we have simulation centers, universities, and just that DNA and that talent of science, tech, and engineering. It's critical to our state. We saw with the end of the space shuttle program that wasn't replaced earlier part of this decade, thousands of pink slips went out. But it's also critical to our national security and to our modern economy. So for all of those reasons, Florida will lead the charge, will be at the tip of the spear. We've seen what's happened. So exciting with SpaceX and their launches and Blue Origin. And now we have the Space Force put in place, a new branch of the military to defend everything that's up there. An analogy I use is like the Navy. We have shipping all over the world that we're dependent on for our economy, and then we have the Navy to defend it. It's going to be the same thing with the Space Force, defending our satellites, defending what will one day be manned stations on the moon and on Mars and on commerce up there.
You've had the ear of President Donald Trump on the multiple visits that he has had to the state of Florida. You were with him multiple times during the campaign trail. Is this something that you talked to him and make sure he knew when you saw him face to face?
Oh, I've talked to him personally several times about it, as has our governor. I've talked to the vice president, who's the head of the National Space Council. They know that Florida's rich history and rich DNA is critical for what we're doing up in space, which is critical to our economy. So it's something that is front and center, and we've made sure the delegation is front and center in their mind. But to the president's point, obviously he thinks big. He's looking over the horizon. He knows that huge, impossible seeming, bold things, like when we announced putting a man on the moon in the 60s, unifies the country and drives the country forward to a common American goal that's not just good for America, but for all of humanity. And that's the reason he came down to the historic SpaceX launch, not once, but twice, in the middle of a pandemic and with social unrest. He also hated the fact that we were dependent on the Russians, that we had to mother may I the Russians to get our astronauts in space over the last decade.
Let me ask you this.
And he loves he loves the fact that it's the private sector, too, leading the innovation and leading the charge, not just government. So all of those things he's fired up about.
Are you worried about any possible budget cuts from a Biden administration?
Well, we saw that before, and I'm hoping we don't see it again. When the space shuttle landed its last flight, in the very beginning of the Obama administration with Vice President Biden, obviously as vice president, thousands of pink slips went out and budgets were cut and shifted in ways that I don't think were unhelpful. I think we're back on track now. I'm hearing good things from a possible Biden administration. It absolutely has to continue, because it's not just us up there now. It's the Russians, it's the Chinese. The Chinese launched more last year than the rest of the world combined, and everything they do is backed by their military. So we have to continue to compete in the 21st century space race.
2 weeks ago, Congressman, we had the launch of the SpaceX Crew 1 mission, and for the last several months, we've seen rockets launching from our Space Coast. It seems like every other week. 9 years ago, at the end of the space shuttle program, could the U.S. have even imagined such a thing down the road? Not only the number of launches, but the U.S. being able to launch astronauts from American soil once again.
Yeah, in a private sector built rocket that's able to re-land the booster out on a barge.
I love that.
So that we can reuse it and make it cheaper. I mean, it's just been extraordinary. What has happened. I don't think anybody would have imagined it just from a decade ago, when Cape Canaveral, the SpaceX, seemed like the whole program was kind of in the dumps. This has been a real revival. And again, that big unifying goal and factor, I think it's really re-energized and reunified the country as well.
Yeah, Senator Bill Nelson always talked about, you got to give it time. It will come back. We had him on so many times when the shuttle was retiring, and he's like, there are big future plans, but they take quite a few years. Fast forward, it's here and it's happening, and we're seeing all these launches. Talk about the military side of this. Okay, you as a former Green Beret, I assume there's a lot that goes on that the general public is not in tune with regarding space and the security of space.
Well, the old adage, you can't be number one on Earth if you're number two in space. It's the ultimate high ground now. And after World War II, we split off the Air Force from the Army to make sure that we could dominate air power around the world, keep the world and the country safe and free. That's what we have to do up in space. Our adversaries know that. The big difference from the Apollo days is our entire modern economy, Beth, is dependent. From agriculture to shipping to global logistics, it's all dependent on what we have up in space. The Chinese in particular know that. Every war game now that we run, the first shots are either fired in cyber or in space, because they want to be able to put all of that at risk. We have to now be able to defend it, and that's why we have a dedicated Space Force up there. The other thing, the Chinese military backs everything they do up in space. It's not like NASA, where they're looking to kind of explore and discover for humanity. It's all military backed. They want to put a separate competing space station up in low Earth orbit. They have a satellite right now circling the moon. They want to put a military manned station on the moon. Again, we have to be able to defend what we have, and we have to be able to compete up there. And by keeping the peace, one side knows that it's not to the advantage of the other to try any funny business.
Fascinating. You know, big picture looking beyond Space Force, the U.S. Space Command and missions to the International Space Station, they talked about, should the U.S. have a commitment to go back to the moon and maybe even Mars?
Well, we do have a commitment to go back to the moon by 2024. This administration has made it, and I certainly hope a future one continues it, to have the next American man and first American woman with boots on the moon by 2024. There's another program called Gateway, which will be basically a space station circling the moon that can, so rather than just one mission, we can have a back and forth, a sustainable presence up there, and then eventually that'll be a launching pad off to Mars. There's national security implications for that too that I can't get into here, but all of those things have to work together up there. We do have a commitment to get back to the moon. We do have a commitment to get back to Mars, and that would just be a truly American and global achievement. And I pray it's sustained.
What do you say to haters or naysayers that say money spent on NASA is wasteful and doesn't get us a good return on investment?
Well, again, you know, the return on investment to our economy through technology, through science, through the engineering spinoffs, things that we use every day and we don't even realize it. Computers we're using right now were developed through the space program, but there's the national security piece too. So just as we're building, you know, ships and aircraft carriers and jets and bombers, we have to build satellites and we have to build things up in space to defend our way of life, defend our economy. I don't want my kids growing up in a world dominated by the Chinese Communist Party. We just saw how they dealt with a pandemic. And if they dominate space, you know, they'll be calling the shots, not the United States. And that's not a future I want for my kids or grandkids.
We're wrapping up, but I want to pivot very quickly to something else very important. Last Sunday, you tweeted this. It's been a bipartisan push to ensure Alan Cash is finally awarded the Medal of Honor. Cash from Sanford in Seminole County would become the first African-American to receive the honor for service in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. This was a very personal quest for you, wasn't it?
It is, and hats off to Representative Stephanie Murphy in Seminole. We've really led the charge to make sure Sergeant Cash and his family, this will be a posthumous award, is recognized. It's been rare to read an act of valor more deserving than the Medal of Honor, than a man who goes back into a burning vehicle, which he was free and clear of, 3 times with himself on fire to save his fellow crewmen. And then when they get to the hospital, he's only asking the doctors and telling them to take care of his men before he passed. And that's an example that we should be holding up for as across the country. And I look forward, we got it through unanimous through the House and the Senate, which is rare these days. I look forward to seeing the president handing this medal over to his family. This would just be a great day for Florida, for the Cash family, and for the country.
Remarkable heroism. Congressman Michael Waltz, District 6, thank you for your time. We appreciate you.
All right. Thanks so much.